Welcome to another layout design video. This week I'm going to go through the development of a plan that I drew for a house that I tried to buy in Lexington, Tennessee. Now, although this house did not have the unfinished basement that I wanted, it did have a very large unfinished attic. Here is the overall shape of what I was able to get out of it. There is a long narrow space on top of the garage with a window at the end, and a much larger space over the rest of the house. Now, in both cases, these are unfinished spaces. They don't even have any proper flooring. So it'll be a lot of work to get them usable. Here is the approach passage. This area in here, where I have the mouse, is a bedroom and bathroom, the only area of the upstairs which is finished. And I was going to finish the rest of it. The areas shaded in grey are areas that have less than full headroom, by which I mean less than 7 feet. The yellow areas are areas of raised floor. This large yellow rectangle right in the middle is above the entrance hall downstairs, but has a 10-foot ceiling and therefore encroaches about 2 feet into the attic space. And then this bit under here is above the front porch, which also has a higher ceiling. And as I say, the grey areas are areas under the sloping roof where I can't get full headroom. There's a lot of subsidiary framing in the area at the moment, but being a builder, I know what I can take out and what I have to replace it with. This wall needs to stay, and I can get rid of the rest of the framing as long as I have a row of columns about here. Overall, this space is about 46 feet long and about 30 feet at its widest point. And the area over the garage is roughly 10 by 20. So let's put that into perspective by bringing up the plan for my existing layout drawn at the same scale. This drawing in the bottom right corner is my current layout at the same scale. So this is a really generous space. It's a little bit awkward having this raised floor right in the middle, and I really struggled to find a way to get around it, making the existing layout sections fit. So before we talk about the development, let's go and show you the finished plan, or a plan for the finished railroad. Now, I never did finish beautifying the plan, doing all the scenery and everything, because the negotiations to purchase this house fell through. So this layout will now never see the light of day. But I wanted to show it to my viewers anyway, because there's actually quite a lot to be learned from it. Here is my main yard, put down the middle of the longest uninterrupted area. Now, the plan calls for a double-track helix under this area here, where the engine terminal is. Well, actually, more correctly, it's 2 single-track helixes, one inside the other, because it's a single-track main line. Trains come up out of the inner helix, run through the main town. Main line goes back along the other side of the main peninsula, and then down the other helix to the staging yard. Now, putting the staging yard underneath the main yard meant that I had plenty of space for it, and I wasn't going to run into the problems of insufficient staging area. So if I bring up the staging yard detail, see, there is plenty of space for staging more than enough trains. Now, this is just drawn with squeezing in as much staging as possible. I probably wouldn't build it all at the outset. I would just make provision for it so that I could expand it later if necessary. Okay, going back to the whole layout now. We see the main yard here with the main circuit just utilising the main peninsula. And the branch line to the harbour, which is still really mainline status, it's just a secondary main line, crosses over the same double-track truss bridge over this river. And then the 2 lines follow each other fairly closely, but one on a falling grade and one on a rising grade. 2 single-track bridges here. We come to the first intermediate town, which is basically just a satellite industrial area for the main city. Winding along the back, behind what I planned to be a paper mill below it. Here is a junction town where the New York, New Haven and Hampshire Railroad would leave, turn around and come back into its own staging yard, while our own line will continue through the town of Centerville, which is already built, down this small peninsula here, another intermediate town, and then winding its way for a considerable distance down to the harbour, which by the way is no longer a terminal because I've been able to extend it into the other area. The line continues after the passenger terminal and ends up in the lower staging yard with another connection to the New York, New Haven and Hartford coming off at the Y into the high level staging. And then this room here I'm going to finish as my work area with a workbench in this corner, storage closet and loads of storage drawers underneath the staging yards. Right at the end of this room is one of only 2 windows in the entire attic, so I'll have some natural light for my workbench. And now there is also room to have a proper yard at the Harbour Town, the absence of which was a major problem on the other layout. And then I have room for a rock quarry in this area, because this part of the country is well known for its rock quarry, so I wanted to include one. And this corner of the room here allowed me to include 2 things that I've always wanted to do but never thought I'd be able to. Firstly, there is over a scale mile of main line between these 2 towns. That's something I always wanted and never thought I'd have the room for it. And then secondly, this area around here is based on a photograph that I fell in love with many years ago. It was the cover of the September 1983 model railroader, which showed a train on a rock ledge high above a lake on the New England, Berkshire and Western Railroad of some model railroad club in Troy in the basement of a university whose name I can't pronounce. Now, even though this is a pretty big layout with a long run from end to end, it still represents a relatively short distance as far as the real railroads are concerned. So most traffic that originates on the layout would be heading to a staging area either directly or via an interchange. It would be tempting to try to add a lot of industry pairs that ship and receive to each other, but that would hurt the believability and the realism. However, having said that, there are a couple of locations where I've been able to make that work. Note in this area I mentioned earlier that this town was going to be a paper mill. Instead of having several small industries, it's a one industry town. Now, a paper mill is a great choice of large industry on a model railroad because it has lots of varied switching and a good variation of car types. Now, one of the products that would be received in large quantity would be pulpwood. And if you recall, I have a pulpwood spur at Centerville, and this town here, I plan on making this area here a pulpwood yard too, these 2 tracks serving it. So that would be the main supplier. Now, this is near the end of the harbour branch. It's the last town before the harbour itself. Runs through Centerville all this way to the main yard, and then pulpwood cars will be switched out into a mainline local and dropped off at the paper mill, and the empties would return via the same route. So it's still a good long run, probably over 2 operating sessions, since it would be switched out of one train into another part way. So it's not so obvious just how close together those 2 industries are on a national scale. Now also, if we look at the harbour town, the largest industry here is of course the harbour itself. And being set in September of 1943, pretty much the height of World War II, there would be a lot of traffic heading off to Europe to assist in the war effort. And this railroad, representing a New England branch into a deep water harbour, the branch line would be seeing a heavily increased traffic because of the port. I'm thinking that a lot of flat cars would arrive at the harbour loaded with war equipment, and then a short distance away we see the rock quarry. So the same flat cars and gondolas would be moved to the quarry and loaded with granite blocks for the trip back up the hill, allowing the same open top cars to run loaded in both directions. And in a similar line, if we consider coal traffic to the harbour, we've got the coal dock with gravity unloading into barges. There's also going to be the municipal power plant in town, and I'm planning on using the majority of this section here as a gasworks. Now, in the period being modelled, gasworks were fairly common in any fairly large town, so that would be another coal user. So there'll be enough coal traffic to the harbour to run a whole train. The empty hoppers would then run back up the hill to Centreville, where some or all of them can be loaded at the gravel loader here for the trip back to staging. And also, if the amount of gravel loaded here is less than the coal consumed here, we also have a good excuse for running loaded and empty hoppers in the same train, which is always interesting if it can be justified. Another large industry I plan on including is a meatpacking plant in this area here, conveniently located right next to the icing platform. The previous version of the layout had no opportunity for running stock cars, and I keenly missed this traffic type. Whereas by including the meatpacking plant, I can now run stock cars again. In the period being modelled, there was still a fair number of small packing plants scattered throughout the country. And of course the 40s was basically the twilight years as far as large-scale rail stock movements were concerned, largely through the advent of better refrigeration that allowed packaged meats and other frozen goods to travel longer distances, that being a lot cheaper than carrying the live meat still on the hoof. Anyway, looking at this layout, you may be thinking that it's a huge undertaking to get this layout running. And yes, you'd be right, it would be a huge undertaking. And I certainly wouldn't embark on such a project if I couldn't divide it into more attainable stages. So let's take a look on how I would plan to complete it. Phase 1, really simple, would be to install half of my existing layout, namely the town of Centreville and the river section, in the one corner of the basement. Note that I can't go right up against the wall because the ceiling is too low here. That's as close as I can get it. And then I'm going to put temporary staging yards on both ends of it. Basically going back to the same operating pattern that I had at my first operating session in the old house. Now this staging yard here be really simple because it's not going to last long. And yes, I do have space to go through the wall a couple of feet there. Remember, it's a sloping ceiling, and this wall is only roughly framed. It's still not insulated or covered or anything. It's just studs at the moment. So I can box that area in to give myself a little bit of extra length in the staging yard. And then this staging yard here, the West End staging, build it properly with locomotive release and a turntable and plenty of capacity, because that will last for several years and may end up becoming permanent if I don't get to build the main yard. Phase 2 would be to install the Harbour Town and connect up the two areas with the main line. Just putting in the minimum of trackage here to start the yard with all the connecting turnouts. Now, I mentioned this raised floor area here. It was really in a bad location. I didn't have quite enough room to get this in and still have room to bring the main line out of the end, because this area in here, unfortunately, is outside the roof area, and I didn't want to go up on the roof and box it in. So I ended up having to twist it slightly, wasting all this space behind it. But actually, it turned out not to be wasted, because now I can, instead of having building flats along here, I can model a little bit more of the town. I can do the passenger terminal in full relief instead of as a building flat, and then put the road in behind it, and then still have enough open space to be able to get in there and access it easily. So anyway, that would be phase 2. Phase 3 would be to add a lot of the intermediate areas, but even here I could break it up and do that in several smaller steps. I've shown A being the lower level staging yard and access to the workbench tracks. I've shown B as being the higher level staging connected up by the Y, and also the New York, New Haven and Hampshire could have a connection around here coming in the other end of that town. But after I drew that, I didn't think I liked it because of this long hidden run around here. So I think I would eliminate that. And if we go to C, would be to build the proper yard in here and some engine facilities. There's more room for industries here. And also on the other layout, I felt that the harbour was a little bit too short because I could only get a 2-foot ship against the pier. But now I have room to extend that peninsula by about 2 feet. Actually, I can go longer, but I don't need to go any more than 2 feet. 3D is the quarry addition, with the option of extending that branch line into another small staging yard in the area between the backdrops. Once again, not sure whether I would put that in or whether I would just have the lead track dead end at the backdrop here. And then lastly, 3E adds this small peninsula here. So each of those steps gives me more varied operation with relatively little work. And if the layout only ever got as far as this, with the main yard and the main staging below it never getting built, I wouldn't be particularly disappointed, because I think this would really be a fine layout, just the way it is right now. More than likely, I would get this far and decide that's enough. Anyway, that layout will never see the light of day because it was for a house that, as I said earlier, the negotiation broke down and we were not able to buy it. Instead, I have purchased another house with an unfinished basement. You'll have to wait a couple of weeks to see that. But I wanted to produce this video anyway because I learned a lot during the design process, and I hope it's been interesting and informative to my viewers. So I'm going to sign off now. Until next week. So thanks for watching, and bye for now.